Greeley, and she's been exploring that, and that's real interesting. So that certainly applies to this whole thing of agriculture. And who am I skipping? Anybody else want to, okay, and I wanted to say too that we had hoped that we would have Kim Patton here, who has been our extension agent for a long time, but Kim has been very ill, was hospitalized for quite a while before Christmas. He's on the mend now, but he's weak as a kitten. And so he's not going to be able to be with us, and we're very sorry about that. And also, Bob Rose from the Rose Ranches, which is a farming operation that's been in existence for 5 generations, which is very interesting. Bob called yesterday, and he's sick as a dog. He said it's not COVID, but it's affecting his lungs. He called again this morning and said, I really thought I could come, but I said, we don't really want you. And so, but he said maybe I can come next month. And so I talked to Steve Rogers, who's right here, who's an expert in all kinds of things. And next month, Steve's kind of on about logging. And Steve tells me Bob Rose also has a logging operation, so maybe we can have him next month. And he can talk a little bit more about agriculture and logging. So, with all of that background, welcome to talking about agriculture. And I want to just tell you a couple of things that when I was thinking about this, because I don't know very much about agriculture, and I'm here to learn too, but I wanted to at least know enough to know what kinds of experts to tap into, if I could. And so I remembered that Jean Hazeltine Shottis, who some of you may have known, she lived across the pond here in the South Bend area. In 1956, I think, did her PhD dissertation on Willapa Bay, its historical and regional geography. And the Hazeltines had the South Bend Journal, her grandfather and her father, and so they published her dissertation, and it's full of fabulous information. And so I just want to read you 2 little things that she said about our area. One of the things that she said that was very interesting to me, because, you know, I'm all about Oysterville, and as far as I'm concerned, everybody came here because of the oysters. Not. It's not true. But she says, the greater majority of the first settlers to Pacific County came with the intent of farming. I thought that was really interesting. And then she has the census, the Washington, the original U.S. and state census books, excerpts from those that are at the Washington State Library. And in 1860, and that's mighty early on, in Pacific County, it doesn't break it down by area, there were 48 oystermen and 31 farmers, okay. In 1883, 23 years later, there were 24 oystermen and 176 farmers. Pretty interesting, I thought. Okay, so, bearing in mind oystermen and farmers, I want to read you a story. If you've already had time to read the paper today, you might have already caught it. And if you haven't, you can reread it at your leisure. It just happens to be one of my saints or sinners stories, and it just happened that it was printed today, and it's a miracle. So this is about John Marshall. And this is based on letters that John Marshall wrote to his wife from Oysterville in 1860, and his wife was in New York. And my uncle Willard, when he was writing Oysterville Roads to Grandpa's Village, contacted everybody that any of the generations still in Oysterville starting in the 1930s, he could get in touch with. And among the people he got in touch with was a descendant of this John Marshall, who had all his letters to his wife. And so this story is based on one of the letters to his wife, and I have all those now. And if you have stuff like that, oh, you have gold. Okay, in the late 1850s, times were dull back at home in Rossville, Staten Island, and John Marshall and his family were having a hard go of it. For some years, his brother-in-law, John Morgan, had been urging Marshall to join him in California, where the gold rush was still in full swing. John drew up a power of attorney for his wife, Mary Morgan Marshall, asked for and received a letter of reference from the minister of the Methodist Church, and in early 1860 sailed for San Francisco. He was a carpenter by trade, 43 years old, and in addition to his wife, he left behind 3 children, ages 9, 6, and 2.5. By the time his ship docked in the city by the Golden Gate, Marshall's brother-in-law, John Morgan, who was one of the Bruce boys, had abandoned his quest for gold and had headed north toward the new mother lode, oysters. The letter he left for Marshall included a map and instructions to meet him at Shoalwater Bay, Washington Territory. But when John got to Oysterville, he found that a new law had been put in place by Washington's territorial legislature, which would require him to wait 6 months before he was eligible to work in the oysters. So he fell back on what he knew best, carpentry. Several letters from John to his wife and children survive and give an interesting account of his difficulties in this new shoal water country. On May 23, 1860, he wrote, "Dear wife and children, your names are ever dear to me. It does me so much good to write to you. I take my pen in hand again to inform you of my health, that I am well, and I pray that these few lines will find you the same. Today is Sunday. I am reading. There is no churches to go to, no Sunday school to go to. I am about the first one up every morning, and Sunday morning I get up and am astonished to see everybody go to their work. It don't suit me to do so. I can't live in such a place. Mary, it does me good to write your name, for it does appear that I am talking to you. I'm getting out timber to build a house for John Morgan. I go to the woods and look for trees suitable for a house, but can't find them. They are so big, B-I-G-E. They are from 150 feet to 200 feet high, and from 3 feet through to 6 feet, and it is so much labor to get them. They stand so close together that we can't hardly get through them. I never saw such woods until I came to this country. People here own claims of 100 acres and 300 and can't get land enough cleared to raise a few potatoes to eat. They have to ship them in. It is so hard to clear off the land. Mary, keep a good heart. We will see one another again. Give my love to you all. I remain your true husband, John Marshall." John Marshall returned to New York a year or so later. The record is silent on whether or not he built that house for John Morgan. Clearly, building a house in Oysterville's pioneer years required a good deal of tenacity. So I just thought that said volumes and made me wonder how people, as much as we love oysters, I don't think you can live on oysters all alone. And people did grow vegetable gardens and farms and so on. But exactly how did they go about it and what did they do? And so that's what we're here to kind of talk about a little bit today. And what were you going to talk about? Do you want to go first?
Oh, if I have to.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to take a couple minutes to talk about some of the earliest folks who were here, besides Mr. Marshall. And one of them was John Briscoe, who I did quite a bit of research on, and Annie Stout. They both had farms here on the peninsula. Briscoe's was located on his donation land claim, which was, and his farm on that donation land claim, his headquarters, his house, was in the north end at about 116th place. When you drive north on the highway, you see him, he's still resting there right next to where his house was, up on the little rise, and that's the Briscoe burying ground. And then Annie Stout had a farm, and it was very near where the Breakers is now. It was on the north end of the Peninsula Golf Course, and she planted, I guess you'd call it almost a new settlement called Pacific Park, and she had the southernmost block there on the north end of the golf course. So she was a neighbor of John Briscoe. So that was after she got divorced from Jonathan Stout, but that's another story altogether. So I just wanted to read you just a paragraph about what was said about Briscoe's farm, and what I said. He must have had a pretty good eye and ability as a farmer, as the Daily Historian reported in July of 1887, that, quote, "Briscoe has oats growing on his place this year that measure 7 feet high and are still growing. How he was able to grow grains and vegetables on the sandy peninsula land is suggested in a deed dated November 10th, 1889. This deed conveyed block number 62 in the town of Pioneer, which he founded, dated November 10th, 1889. The deed states, quote, among the many conditions he required for this piece of land, that the school district shall, quote, be erected thereon a dry earth closet with suitable drawers to receive the students' deposits. And the same shall be emptied as often as once as 2 weeks, and taken from the above described premises, converted into powder, or given to whomsoever will take it away and fertilize their farm with it. A failure to comply with any or all of these conditions make this deed void." That sounds like Briscoe. So that's kind of third world farming. You know, they use that method all around the world. But for Briscoe, where he was, he didn't have a lot of trees. He had prairie. And if you go, when you're driving north on the highway there and you look over on the left, you'll see kind of some tracts of grassland that have never been built on that are near his cemetery where he's at. And that's where he grew his crops. There was no roadway there when he did that before they built the railroad, and that lake, Briscoe Lake to the right side, would flood every year. And so that would help the nutrients for that sandy soil. But the other thing that he did was raise cattle. And of course what the cattle produce also helped enrich the soil there, so he could grow those oats that go 8 feet high. And by the way, he had a lucrative contract with the U.S. Army at Fort Canby to sell them beef. So he was a really successful farmer. Now Annie Stout, who had her farm where the north end of the golf course is, she had fruit trees there, and she grew some vegetables and crops. But she really wasn't a farmer. She was really a very disruptive neighbor to everybody around her. John Allenblade was another farmer, and he was just north of Briscoe. He bought some of Briscoe's land, and he was terribly frightened of Annie Stout. In fact, all her neighbors were, or all these big strapping guys, they didn't want to have anything to do with her because she was just kind of downright mean and nasty. She got into all sorts of arguments and fights with them, but that was a different story. But her farm basically was fruit trees. So I think you're going to maybe talk just a little bit about that, maybe. I just wanted to point out something, is this little map I brought here. You can look at it afterwards. Of course, I I put it in upside down. So if you look at it this way, you'll see that it's 1873. But really what it shows is where the grasslands are and where it's more heavily vegetated. And I'll just leave it like that as a show of how not to do something when you give a presentation. So there you go, that's about all I have to say.
Thanks, Mike. Kathleen, can you piggyback on that? Or-
Yeah, well, everybody's speaking about anti-step. Theoretically, there's a tree still existing, and I have yet to find it. And so that's part of, okay, so my project is, Jim Say suggested as community historians, gee, maybe somebody should look at finding old pioneer orchards and fruit trees. And so Nancy Allen and I thought about it, came back and said, okay, we'll do it. Not knowing what we're getting into. So basically that is being a detective. You know, lots of going out on road trips and peeking in people's yards and also getting tips. And so Mike gave us that tip, and we just haven't been able to find it. In fact, you told me to talk to Knudsen, and Barbara talked to his wife, because he doesn't know anything about it. So one thing I've learned is it's there, but they sort of reveal themselves in time. Because there's trees we've driven past for years, and then we're standing by it, we look up and we go, oh my God, there's a tree here. So I have great faith that we're going to find it. I wanted to say too, you were talking about Kim Patton. When we first started, Kim, sat down with me a couple times and gave me lists of maybe who to contact. And also, he taught us how, or told us how, to document a tree, which is to, photograph the leaves, the bark, the tree itself when it's blossoming and fruiting. And so that's part of what we did in the beginning. We just found the trees and photographed them. Then we eventually went back to key trees, and we used Joni Cooper, who's in Oregon, and I don't know if you've heard, same time we were doing this, there was somebody else doing it called the Lost Apple Project. And come to find out we were both sending our things. I wondered why ours weren't getting through sometimes. But so then we would take, pick 5 or 6 apples that had to have the stem and the leaves, and send it to her, and she would identify them for us. And that was probably 50%, because depending on, we're tracking like 50 trees, and is it ripe or not ripe, or, if it's not your tree, you don't really know. So that was a problem. But we discovered some rare apples that were considered lost apples. And so Sydney had asked me, like, how did the trees get here? And there's three ways. One of them, the pioneers on the wagon trains would bring seeds. And of course, I found out that you think you're bringing a seed of, like, let's say, a Gravenstein. But when you plant it, it may not be a Gravenstein. So, but they brought the seeds anyway. But there's also a man, I got an article from a friend really early on, and I didn't have time to look at it because this was short notice. But his name was Llewellyn, and he came out by wagon train. And he brought either scions or rootstock. But that was unusual. And one of the other things is Hudson Bay Cowlitz Farms. And we found out about that. We were at Julia Butler Hansen's house in Cathlamet. And there's a really old pear tree there with a narrative panel that says, like, I think it's 1858. It was purchased from the Hudson Bay Cowlitz Farms. And so then in several books, there's talk of it. They sold to, like the Army and different farmers. And the other one is Stark Nurseries, which is still in Portland. It was started in 1816. So I'm sure that a lot came from that. We've contacted them, but it's going to take, a lot of tenacity to get through and see if they have archives about what kind of fruit trees they sold in those days. So basically, for me too, I started becoming aware of heritage trees and heirloom seeds and things like that in the 1990s, when it became kind of popular for sustainable farming, and people realized that our U.S. seed bank wasn't up to snuff, and so people started collecting them and exchanging them on their own property. We found over 100 trees. There's more, but when we went out to New Cell, it was so overwhelming. We kind of just like, there's probably lots more than we found.
Kathleen, can I ask you a question? When you find these trees, is there a way you can date them? Do you know how old they are?
Well, you can't by looking at them, because, for instance, one I was going to talk about on Stringtown, they look very small, and you think, oh, maybe 40 years, but we know who lived there. We found out who lived there and when, and so that dates it. Sometimes there's a tree on, this is on Stringtown, a real deep history. Stringtown looks like there's nothing there, but oh my gosh. And probably a lot of our focus was there. So on the Pickernell land, donation land claim, there's a little tree hanging on, and Columbia Land Trust owns it now, so we got permission to go on. It could be Pickernells, but it could be the Hunters or the Christiansons, you know. So in that case, I don't know that we'll, you know, we may, because we're at the point now that we'll go back and do more deep research and try to track it. But I was telling Kathy, you know, like a land claim or anything beyond, like, let's say, you know, even 1900, you go up to the archives in South Bend, and it's the big books, not in order, not by name, and so it takes a lot of time to go in there and really try to track something. So what we've been really lucky, and obviously there's anybody doing history, the more you talk to people, the piece of history you want may not be in your family's archive, it may be in somebody else's, or you think you've talked to the person, and then all of a sudden, you know, a conversation will come up, and they'll come up with some piece of information that you should have had 5 years ago, but they just thought of it, you know. So, so that's kind of how we're piecing it together. You know, there's a tree right now out on McGowan that, because of the way the census, which I talked to you about, the SB did, 1860, it lists McGowan, and then it lists the Hudson Bay store and house. Well, it looks like it's in order, and it probably was, but that's another thing we learned. For any historian, be really specific, because it could say it's on the way to be falling out your front door, it could be 10 miles, you know, so we don't know. So was the store right after McGowan ended, or was it down where Washington Hall was and down in Chinookville? We don't know. So we're trying to track that. We'd love it to be the Hudson Bay store, but so it just takes more research. We don't always know. If it's somebody's orchard, then they have a history of it, yeah. Like we just found one, Kate Gable had a friend of hers call me in Ocean Park, and she lives this huge apple tree, it must be 150 years old. And she knows that there was a man before her house, the one across the street, and it was his little farm. So once we look into that, we can see a date, and we know who it was. So it's dicey. But sometimes it just, like on Pickernell, you can tell the story of Pickernell's land. And, you know, we're looking at the trees as witnesses of history, you know. Is that they're there, they've lived through all these times and all this history that goes on. And some of them have made it. I don't know. We've lost a few during COVID. People like to get busy out there and do something and take a tree out. So mostly we found apples, but we also found, like, I forget my order here, but in McGowan, I'll talk about McGowan for a second. we found a picture of a house and a shed and the Wiccans, and they worked for P.J. McGowan. And it's 1900 to 1910. The shed is still there, which dated it. And there's a tree in a thicket of Scotch broom and hawthorn. Very hard to get to. We finally got in there to get some apples and date it. So with that, that's pretty clear. We were lucky to have that photo, you know, and to know it was theirs, and it isn't McGowan's, because there's other trees they had there. And on that one, I'll go to it. It was so interesting. Okay, so the Wiccans, so we had there's ID, and it's a Roxbury russet. And it's a cultivar believed to be the oldest apple bred in the U.S., having first been discovered and named in the mid-17th century in the former town of Roxbury, part of Massachusetts Bay Colony. So it's a really rare apple. And fortunately, it's probably fortunate that it's surrounded by hawthorns because it's protected at all this time. And most people don't know it's there, you know. So while I'm at that, in this place, so also on McGowan land is something we call the Stuckey Archive. And Colonel Stuckey lived there, and right on the Wiccan Coil property. And so he's like a house away, his land. And so he decided to get grafts on every tree he could find on the peninsula. And so they're all grafted there to trees, but there's some original trees too. Barbara's been up, Barbara Christian, who is in the project too. She's been up on the hill, like there's where the McGowan workers were. There's some trees still there. It's difficult. It's one of those things about you should pay attention. Kim had on our list Dan Stuckey. Oh, okay, we'll get to it. By the time we got back, Dan Stuckey was dead. He died. And so anyway, there's a lot there. We kind of drew a circle around it, you know, we'll get to it, and I don't know, we'll see if we get in it. But there's a lot of trees, a lot of history there.
Can you use more people?
Huh?
Can you use more people to help in your?
Yes.
I mean, should we be soliciting for you?
Yes, thank you. Right, even if it's just eyes and ears, and like Kate telling her friend to call me, you know, or but yeah, especially during, let me put it this way, it would be very helpful when it comes time to collect fruit, to idea, there's some we still have to do, or to take photos, like the one here at the Krellen, Pecos Krellen on the bay. I have some spotters here in Oysterfield that said, okay, go take it. Now the apples are ripe, or that sort of thing. That's very hard because we're going from, oh my God, north of Raymond to, you know, they sell to the entire peninsula. So, yeah, that was challenging. And also getting the stories. That's, if anything comes from this, it's like, there's so many people, other history we came upon, but we didn't have the time to go interview those people. A lot of them are gone now. So that would be helpful too if anybody's interested in collecting history, you know, that we come upon, but we can't get to everybody, you know, to do it, unfortunately. So I thought too, since we're in the McGowan area, I'd read this passage. So you have McGowan, you know, town of McGowan, then out to Chinookville, and there's Washington Hall. And so the trees aren't there anymore, but it's a document of it. And it's from Chinook by the Sea, written 1924. Through an agreement with the Chinook, the Chinook were permitted to draw water from the stream on his place. Within 10 days of that agreement, Hall claimed the natives had broken down his garden fence and torn out the fruit trees. And if you go there, in some other books, there's that water they talk about, that little creek is still there. It's interesting, when I wrote this, it also made me aware of this idea that the Chinook were allowed to get water, which was already their water. But so it was interesting to read that again and look at it from a different light.
Wasn't that, am I wrong? It seems to me that I have read that Washington Hall fenced off that creek and would not let the Chinooks
Right.
have water until they bought whiskey from him.
Oh, that's interesting.
Has anybody else heard
That I
that
didn't hear
story?
that part, but that's
And
what
that,
this is
that
about.
was, I think that was one of the complaints that the Chinooks had with the Anson Dark Treaty.
Why they got mad.
They wanted, they wanted, in that treaty, that Washington Hall should be kicked out of the area. And eventually he did leave, but I don't remember the details. Steve, do you remember any of that?
Yeah, and last night I asked Barbara, okay, so, because I remembered something, but we couldn't find it that quick, but why did he, why did they get so mad? So, yeah, makes sense, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
He was not a righteous man.
No. So the other place, the one I was going to talk about, Stringtown. When I first got here, I heard my great-grandmother and great-grandmother lived on Stringtown. So I thought, oh, I'll go look. Well, anybody's been out to Stringtown, there's not a sniff of anything historical. I mean, it just looks like it's desolate. However, over the years, I would say it has this incredibly rich history. And we are very fortunate to meet a couple people who live there, and their families have lived there, and they told us stories. So probably our first field trip was on Stringtown. And so it was Nancy Allen, Barbara and I. And Barbara is in the back seat of the car with her book open, reading a passage about, she wanted to find Edward's land claim. And there's the whole story of his murder and all that sort of thing. And so she's reading a passage, but this first passage was from We Remember. From the road, Mrs. Sweeney could be seen sitting on the steps of her house churning butter. A scene from the road. Yeah. So the key word here in finding Edwards, which I'm going to run you through, was the word road. And it took us several years traveling that road to figure this out, and it was like a mystery. Because it made no sense, because now that's where Cecil Timmons, there's an orchard there on Sweeney Hill. It's just a cliff, and there were no steps, and we just kind of couldn't figure it out. Eventually, working on the Timmons and documenting that, you could kind of see this little kind of, Jim Sayce talked about reading the land for history, right? And that really is true. Because there was this place that looked like there was a road or something, and we kind of dismissed it. And so that day, we didn't find Edwards, but we came across at the other end, towards where you come out at the Chinook, a little orchard. And it has maybe, I think, 10 trees. And all that's left is a concrete path and concrete steps. So we called it the stoop house, because obviously somebody lived there and this was their orchard. And we took photos of it, and eventually we met Doris Heiner, and her grandparents bought a lot of that land at that end. And she told us the story that this was Peter Dahl's land. And anyway, and so Peter had a seine netting fishing operation in conjunction with Columbia River Packers. And so So on his property, and that was interesting enough, I mean, to know about that, because fishing was important. But two lost apples were found there as well. Agano, which was first noticed in the United States in 1880, it's an American cultivar, and Kitageski, which was listed as a lost apple. Now this is one of the Lost Apple Project found around 218, 219. I have to go back and look at my notes. I think we were finding it about the same time in this orchard. And they found one, so now there's two that we know about. So then, talking to Dottis, we would meet with her and sit in the orchard and talk about, and she taught us like where everybody lived, what they did, and so we have a map of that. Eventually we'll probably do Stringtown. And so one day she was saying, we were looking for Edwards, you know, and she said, oh, well, you know, the road went behind behind Sweeney Hill. It isn't where it is today. It went up in the hills and came down. Well, along the way, we had found an apple on a fence. Like the fence is like growing in, you know, it's growing into the fence. And it's where the Pleasantville School was, and that was Edwards' land claim. We did find that out. So the apple itself, and I think Jim said it to us, oh, you know, if it's on a road or a fence, it's somebody just threw it out. You know, it's just tossed out, just don't think about it. Well, this apple was a Calvo Blanc de Hiver, 17th century French dessert apple found at Thomas Jefferson's. So this was not any market variety, so we knew we'd found some remnant of an orchard. And so, anyway, sitting with Dottis, and we go back and forth between Dahl and Edwards. Sitting in the orchard one day, we said, well, you know, it's been a couple years, we noticed a lot of, she owned, it was Dahl's, her house, and then this park-like, looked like lawn in a park. And I said, you know, we noticed cherries. We didn't realize there were big old cherry trees there. And she goes, oh yeah, well that's where Dahl's men dried their seine nets and mended them. And that, it was so astounding to me that we pass by this history all the time, and here's this beautiful lot with cherry trees, and suddenly it just came to life, you know. And of course, you know, salmon fishing is such a big part of the history, and there it was on that road. Interestingly enough, nobody knows about Dahl. He's mentioned briefly as working for McGowan as a foreman. Irene Martin, who's an expert on fishing, has never heard of him. So in some way, we retrieved a piece of history that isn't written anywhere. And I think as historians, that's one of the really good things to do is when you can retrieve a story and preserve it and make it known.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you right,
Yeah.
can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
And you can come back, but I'm gonna segue into.
Yes, good.
Into,
Oh, I was
is that
listening.
okay?
Yeah, I've done that.
Okay. No, you're not necessarily. Okay, Ardell and Malcolm,
You want us to talk about that?
I want you to follow up with this about cranberries and your history.
Okay.
And your history with
Do you want, well, yeah, do you want us to talk about the extension at the end or not, or at the, in the middle? Or extension?
Anything you want.
Anything, okay. Well, I'm Ardell, and this is Malcolm. Anyway, well, I made a note that like I should remember this stuff, but, so we own the Cranberry Farm just north of Black Lake. I don't know how many of you know where that is. But that wasn't our first farm. We bought our first farm in 1981, which is about 100 years after the first Chabot farm was in 1883. So we just discovered that.
And we brought it from Jeannie's father.
Yes, yeah, we bought Don Tilton's farm, and it had 8 acres of cranberry, about 3 could be harvested, and then there was some support land, about 20 more acres. And so that was the farm we could afford, and so we bought that first. And then a year later, we bought where the house is, from Early Brady. I don't know how many of you ever remember him, and LeClaire. LeClaire was probably more famous around here. But, so we were the fourth owners of that farm. I don't know how many owners of that
I know
farm.
Rex Headland was.
Rex Headland before, yeah,
I don't know after, before that.
yeah, okay. Anyway,
I kind of have a feeling Rex was the first one.
he might have been. But, and we'll talk about that history, but basically we were extension agents, and I was in Palouse County and he was in Lewis County. You were in actually 4 counties, which you can talk about that, but, so we worked for the university and we wanted to do our own farm. And so that's why he starts looking, and he was talking about a dairy farm. I said, no way would I do a dairy farm. But anyway, so we found the farm, and these 2 farms were for sale, and we bought Don's first. And so it was kind of interesting because we didn't know whether we could make it as farmers, so we kept our jobs for 4 years, and we kept coming back and forth for all of our vacations, all of our weekends and stuff. And we had a person that was on the farm that we would hire him for the weekend while we're there and a couple more days, and then he would work when we went back to work. So, and it worked out fine. By 1985, we decided to move here full time. So we've been here for 42 years farming. Let's see. It was called Cranmore at the time, and we changed the name to Cranmac for McPhail, but the historians were very upset. That's supposed to be Cranmore, especially,
Robinson,
yeah,
Noreen.
Robinson.
Sure.
Oh,
that
she
was in El Laco, and she wasn't real happy about that.
But
And
anyway,
then, her folks were having health problems and so on, her dad especially. And, she grew up in Cottage Grove, but anyway, they retired at Yahawks. And, anyway, they, were thinking about moving closer to us. And so they put a double wide on some of our property right by the lake, and that was upsetting to Noreen. Sort of like, let's keep it all clear, But, we were talking earlier, there's a history of, there was a sawmill there at
There's a
one
sawmill and a box making factory,
Yeah.
building.
and a peat farm, or a peat mill thing. But there were so many trees, why would anybody need to farm the peat to burn?
That's what they found out after they got into it.
So, just over the years now, that there's been about 19 different purchases we've made. So we have 93 acres of cranberries and about 150 acres of support land, we call it. Some is support land to keep the Pepsi plant from being right across the road from us. That kind of thing. We buy the property, it's not worth much except for security, I guess.
That's, across from our mailbox, that part that goes Sand Ridge or 101, we own 10.5 acres there. That was $60,000 that does us no good, but protects us.
But Pepsi was looking for an industrial site for that thing that's on.
It's on Pioneer Road, the
And you
distribution
imagine all the trucks
center,
going
yeah.
on? Anyway, so
So
you
that-
have to do stuff like that, that doesn't really pay you, but it does in the long run, so. So what else was I gonna say here? Oh, and so we'll talk about the history of the farm, which goes back, we were the fourth owners, as I said, and the person that built the place, the house, was H.M. Williams. And he was kind of like every picture we've seen of him, he was a gentleman farmer. I mean, he's all dressed up and he had his little car. And he was in the first race up to South Bend when they
Yeah, it
first
wasn't a
opened.
race, it was when the road was open between
Okay.
South Bend and Long Beach, 1914. In the community building, Steve, they had a picture, and here he is, big as life, with his Studebaker, whatever it was. But
Is it?
that first time that road was opened, and I'm sure it wasn't much of a road, but, they were able to get through, yeah.
It still is in some years.
Yeah. We avoid it when we can.
But as far as, well, we will get to that, that was 1910 that our house was built. And we've done some, we did a little bit of an addition onto the house, but it was pretty old. But the thing that always made us wonder is the Bradings lived there for 18 years before us, and there'd been 2 other families, but they were in the modern age, and you went to the center of the room and pulled the light, and there were no heat and no bathroom upstairs with 5 bedrooms.
There's a hanging,
4 bedrooms.
Oh,
So, you know, I wonder,
light bulb, not like this, just the light bulb itself with the little thing to pull. Those are the upstairs, and you can look through the wall next to the window that looked to the south and see air, or see light.
Sounds like my house.
well, obviously, they didn't want to put anything into it, but we had to put a foundation and all that. But the house is actually on pilings, so that when a log truck goes by, you can kind of feel But, and then the warehouse that's there, right, our house was probably built, I don't know, maybe you know,
It
Gene.
was there.
In the 40s,
my
maybe?
folks bought.
Okay.
Heidi and Guido.
They were the ones that built that?
Before the Brady.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
and they built that barn?
I think so. I remember sorting cranberries.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, well, I think you were gonna read that little excerpt. We weren't in other words, in 1914, we were late in the cranberry growing day. It was 1980, or 1883 that Chabot came, and he came from Chicago, is it? Anyway, well, first of all, I need to do a little,
He came from Quebec, it said in the book,
Yeah.
which I was surprised, but.
this is an excellent book if you want to learn all the history of Washington cranberries here, especially in all of Washington. Because Sydney wrote this,
Ardell.
Melinda and I
Melinda.
were her editors, and it took us, what, a year, probably, or 6 months?
We didn't have a year.
We didn't
Seemed
have a
like
year.
a year.
It seemed like a year.
Yeah.
But it's got all the pictures. In fact, it has a picture of that tree that your John Marshall was talking about. That all the big giant trees.
Yeah.
But it's really complete. But it's this kind of those little books that just, you know, a lot of pictures and a few little stuff, information. So
It's available in the Cranberry
Cranberry
Museum.
Museum, that's our plug.
Gift shop.
Anyway, okay, so, I think that's, well, the peat farm, another reason the peat farm didn't work so well at our place, it's where our garage is now, was that there were so many trees around that people had plenty of firewood, but it's also on a ground called C-strand variant muck. And so it's not, up in the Grayland area, they can cut it with a knife, and it's kind of that peaty stuff like you think in Scotland. But ours is just gooey stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Too much water?
well, it's definitely a wetland.
Yeah, water.
Yeah. It has so much, loose peat or liquid peat, I guess.
It's liquid peat.
But when I went to Grayland, soon after we bought the farm there and visited with a farmer, he was out with a chainsaw cutting a ditch in the peat.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's a little different up there.
Because you
Did
just,
they ever burn it up there? Did
I
they
don't
ever
think,
use it
I
for
don't know.
fire?
I don't know.
It smells good, you know, I mean, in Ireland and
Yeah.
Scotland it does.
yeah, no, it's nothing like that, yeah.
I don't
It
know.
didn't take them long to figure that out. And they'd gone to such trouble because there was a big building there too that was behind where our garage is now, that they were gonna manufacture
Really?
the peat, yeah. And I saw pictures of that building from way back when, but,
A couple of other items of interest of that area is the road that goes by by the lake was the old railroad. There was a railroad comes out of Makeover, I guess, and went across and in that area. And there was actually a little depot thing, some kind of a barn where the train loaded or unloaded stuff. So, so that road is high compared to our land, and so we have kind of a wet yard. But then they keep trying, then these loggers up there, people brought way up on the hill, and they logged quite a bit of the land way up on top, and it came through, yes.
I'm wondering about, we heard that there was a mostly Chinese community that lived, was that their access? That same,
The Chinese people that live I think it was the railroad. Does anybody know where the railroad came?
I think it was on that Spring Street,
Yeah.
where that is.
Where the
Yeah.
railroad,
Yeah, that's my, I live
right across the top of the lake.
which was not only the barracks
Black Lake?
for cavalry
Yeah.
workers,
Yeah.
but also was a community water source, apparently.
so they had more or less a north-south access rather than a east-west, probably?
I don't know, it'd be interesting to know who built the tunnel. Those must have been Chinese or famous for doing that.
Yeah,
No?
well, we have to get my railroad. Yeah, well, I don't remember, but no, it wasn't, it was railroad workers and they weren't, they didn't have Chinese coming in.
Okay.
It was, American white labor, it was not Chinese or, as
Yeah.
far as I remember.
I remember there was a controversy, there was a bunch of Italian people that built it. And there was a labor dispute over how they were being paid.
Anyway, the railroad did go right by our house and it went east through the woods and on down and to Chinook and on to where the ferry was and so on, you know.
So
As a matter of fact, there was one farm that we just bought in 2010 that's 15 acres of cranberries that's on the east part of our farm. But they used to carry or move their cranberries out to the railroad because it was the closer way to move their fruit. And through the brush and made a little road through there. That was,
Did they have a shed or anything, or did the railroad?
It was some kind of, yeah.
And
Flat load. No, I think there was some kind of a building, shed that was on the north edge of the road, because we've seen a picture somewhere about that. And I think they loaded and unloaded, that was
Yeah.
basically all that was there.
because there was one here on the peninsula at Cranberry Road where, you know, and, I know Virginia,
yeah,
not Virginia, Verna Aller's family, had to keep it out there.
yeah.
But it wasn't for people, or anything, it was just for crackers.
Well, and the other interesting fact is that this H.M. Williams, he was smart enough to get water rights on Black Lake. And so the farm is, so we feel like we're the luckiest farm on the peninsula to have the water rights there. And the city of Ilwaco was in the waterway for years. When we first came, they were still they were using the water for domestic water. And EPA said that they were one of the fifth worst in the nation. So they had to find a new source.
It would have been very acidic, actually.
Yeah, and then there are beavers and, you know.
What year was that?
Well, we moved here and they were still in it
In
in
the
81.
let's see, in the late 80s, probably.
Late 80s.
Red's Restaurant in Ilwaco is the only restaurant I've ever gone into that they brought, I said I wanted coffee, and they said, oh, no, you don't want coffee, your water's terrible.
It was at Red's, probably.
Yes, it was.
Never Red's. Anyway, yeah, Ilwaco's water was notorious, and so they had to go up Chinook Valley Road.
Well,
get water.
Indian Creek or whatever it is. Yeah.
But anyway, so we have the rights on that. Malcolm and DOE gave us assignment, I guess, to monitor the outlet.
We had a little push-pull with Lunk, Wallen, and on who should manage the level of water in the lake. And DOE, I was for it. Gary Hansen, I never met him, but anyway, he said, no, you're in charge of the lake. And so we control the lake now. We're trying to get as much water out of there as we can for floods. But when it comes March time, then we block off the lake and try and get the water as high as we can for irrigation.
You may have seen years past, if you were ever down that way, that when Winnebago was in there, they're pumping for the canneries and their city water, and then we're trying to harvest, and it would be stumps. And it was, our end was really difficult, but with the fact that we had the water rights, the city would have had to pump for
Well,
us.
they did one year pump water over to our inlet.
Yeah.
They had to put a big diesel pump and put 4-inch
Big
line, temporary line, irrigation pipe, and pumped it over to where we could finish our harvest. Then that was soon after that they were out of the lake and did the Indian Creek thing.
But back in the day when H.M. Williams was developing, what he would do is he bought like 140 acre tract of land, and I assume that was probably all the Cranmore area. And then he'd sell off to different people. Well, he'd clear and sell off the
Well,
land.
he didn't sell anything to start with. There was a drainage problem. The water was too high, so he started, he used a dredge. I don't know how he did that. I have a dredge, I don't think I could have done it. Anyway, he straightened out Tarlet Slough so that it's a straight shot up to 101. Now, beyond that is meanders around, but he kept extending the slough, and then he would flood out somebody where he stopped. So then he'd have to continue on until he got clear over to 101. So that's a straight shot now.
In fact, we learned from Dobby Weigert, he tried to do a portage of Tarlet Slough, like
For the scouts?
for the
when they were
scouts.
doing the- yeah.
And of course, we have culverts in there now, they have to pick up their boat and go through it like that. But it didn't used to be straight, it would wander. In fact, we have some fairly, you can tell in some of the bogs, it's a little wetter. It just seems like that's where
That's
the
the
original.
Yeah, it used to meander around our farm
Yeah.
before Williams straightened it.
But anyway, but he did manage to sell off parcels, and maybe Headland was one of the first ones, I don't know. But the Oscars, that was their dad, somebody, not Oscar, but,
So can you tell anything about some of the early experiments with the native berries?
Oh, yes. Well, actually, they talked about even the Lady Washington would come around and they would stop and want to get cranberries to load on because of scurvy. It was good for the sailors, and those are wild cranberries they were taking.
Yeah, right.
And then that was a big trade with Indians. They would trade for different things, their berries for something. But, so yeah, and there was a couple of guys, there was a Hanson, you had something much to read about that guy.
Yeah.
That had 2 acres right near where we are, and that's all he had, but he the weeds take over so fast if you're not right on.
You know, I looked around and seen where there used to be cranberries. There are so many areas that right now we have just about 600 acres total on the peninsula. And my thought is that there were probably, if everything that once got planted was still planted, there'd probably be 1,500 acres.
Wow.
because there's so many areas that, that have, even some old warehouses and that sort of thing still hanging on. But,
Well, but the, Swan even found, we don't know for sure if those were, the ones we grow are vaccinium, microcarbon. And we don't know that they're even, that, those wild ones were even.
well, I'm sure they weren't.
They weren't, they were vaccinium, but they weren't the kind of.
And not necessarily a vaccinium, that would be the family and the species that microcarbon. But we've been to all the cranberry growing areas, the commercial places, you know, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, well, Nova Scotia and others, and you see wild cranberries, and those are, I mean, they're a cranberry, but they're from a different family. But, anyway, that's,
I have a question. Are there still any wild cranberries around?
I think so, up north of,
I don't know of any, you know.
I thought there were some you could find on that Oyster River Road going to the water. Like that.
We're here, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, we're here.
Does anybody know of where
Have
you're?
you seen it?
We had some that had been planted. We bought 21 acres of wasteland. Is willows and crabapple and so on. And that had been in cranberries in the past. And so I found berries that lived through all that underbrush and so on. And we now have cleared it off and put into bog.
Those may not have been the wild ones.
They wouldn't have
Then,
been wild, they would have been the more cultivated style. But going back to the Lucille McDonald book,
Yeah.
yeah, this coast cranberry, or coast country. Anyway, there's a section of all different kinds of interests. Obviously, there's oysters and farm, timberland and all that. But there's a section on cranberries, and there's not, she doesn't have a date, you know, of when this was published.
Really?
Yeah,
It's not in the book.
yeah, it's not in the book.
I think it's early sixties.
I thought it was in the sixties too, yeah.
I've got a different version.
I have a hard copy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, there's a couple of notes in here that I'll read. And these were wild cranberries that the Indians had found and picked and so on. And of course, in the old days, they were picking them with their hands. And their hands would get raw. I mean, early cranberry growers. And it wouldn't have been a cranberry grower. There's a note here, the first thing on cranberries section that she had, chapter 23. The Thanksgiving dinner eaten by Lewis and Clark at Chinook on November 24th, 1805, made up for its lack of turkey with portions of venison, ducks, geese, and cranberry sauce. And then there's another reference. In 1847, the brig Henry, the ship, carried cranberries in its cargo from the Columbia River to San Francisco. And 5 years later, James Swan told of white traders at Chinook who went annually to the cranberry marshes on Shoalwater Bay in the fall to bargain with Indians for part of their berry harvest, which they stored in a cabin erected especially for this purpose. So there are some references there. There's some others. So there were wild cranberries around here. And it's interesting that in the early days, it seemed like when the cranberry growers started growing more of the improved varieties, that their market was San Francisco. They put it on a ship to San Francisco. And in the early days, the cranberry growers were fighting with one another to make sure their berries got sent.
Just like the oysters. Yeah, same thing with the oysters. And, you know, can I insert
Yes.
somebody else here
Sure.
for a minute?
Sure.
What, Tucker?
Yeah.
You know, that reminds me back to John Marshall, and he said, you know, we can't have enough land to grow potatoes. We have to import them, but Tucker has another spin on that from his great-grandfather about potatoes and Woodard Landing, right?
That's correct.
And that kind of ties into your products going to San Francisco too.
It does sort of, also ties into this Aurora colony, which you might have heard of, and Willie, I think it'd be pronounced Kyle, when he was buried up there in up that direction. And so my great-grandfather first came to this area in 1864 to load potatoes at Woodard's Landing, which is now called Willapa. One time it was called Willapa City. And they had just built that wharf there in 1864. So they had a place, and he came up in Sarah Louise was the name of the schooner. It was a small schooner, but they loaded it with potatoes to take to San Francisco. So the question that you and I were talking, and the question kind of came up, well, what happened to those people that came there to that Willapa City, Woodard's Landing area? Why did they leave? Because they came, and they came across on the wagon trains, and they settled in that area. The scouts had scouted it out, and so I had this book about it. Actually, a friend of mine wrote this book, and his family were in the Aurora colony, interestingly enough. But the part here where they talk about it, boy, I hope I have it in the right place. After Dr. Kyle, he was the head of this expedition, and when he got out here, his report was triumphantly successful crossing the plains. His letters from Willapa were a very discouraging contrast. The land itself cannot be surpassed in the whole creation with regard to fertility, for everything that is planted grows here in abundance, but no one knows what is to do with the crops. There were very few people thereabouts and no market for products. Most settlement was in the Willamette Valley. So they were up there, things were growing well. I'd kind of heard that they couldn't grow anything, that the soil wasn't good for growing. But this contradicts that completely. And the problem was they couldn't get their products to market.
They didn't like the weather either.
Yeah, it does go into that a little bit.
And the reason Woodard's Landing was that as far as a small schooner could get out, the North Fork of the Willapa River.
Yeah,
It couldn't go any farther because of the tide.
I wouldn't be surprised.
The rivers start, it's pretty small there. Well, bigger than that, but
Yeah, it was the head of navigation probably at that time. Yeah. And another problem is they didn't have anything for clothing there. They didn't have any, there were no sheep in the area. That was a real problem for them. So there were some things that were just missing that they thought would be there when they got there. They were missing, and so they relocated down near Salem, Oregon, in Aurora. Really, they left the next year. But it wasn't because necessarily, and, you know, They also mentioned that there's not enough open land. It's too difficult to clear the giant trees of this virgin forest. That was another problem they were butting their heads against. So they just got there and had some problems. They did find that they were in the distillery business, and they did find that they had a ready market there with the free oyster. They did mention that. So just sort of an interesting perspective. This is the group that I think he's Dr. Kyle, but
Steve talked about.
That you were talking about, and he had died.
Pickle Willie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Pickled Willie.
Alcohol.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well, you know, it's funny that none of the cranberry information tells us about any cranberry wine being made at that time. That's true, that's kind of
Well,
a new
you know,
thing.
another thing that occurred to me was, sometimes the penny doesn't drop for a long time. But I always wondered why Ed Loomis, Louis Loomis, the train guy's older brother, was so intent upon raising sheep along the ocean, or on that side of the peninsula. And it wasn't until Tucker was sharing that information with me the other day that I realized, really, they had the same problem here. They needed to make clothing, and in those days, wool was it, and that's, you needed to spin and weave and all of that stuff, and they had to raise sheep. What else were they gonna do? There was no Sears catalog.
The other thing to remember too is those sheep were the impetus for the construction of the first dock
That's right.
down at Ilwaco, and also really for getting the train going,
That's right.
because Loomis needed a way to ship that wool across the river and down to California. And so L.A. Loomis, he built the first dock down there in Ilwaco, the Ilwaco Wharf Company, and that was very successful and got him his start in transportation.
and another little tidbit, is that's what we do, isn't it? Little tidbits that we kind of bring together. And I have a few little tidbits. Another one in 1883, up in that Willapa Valley area, the farmer said that he was getting 600 to 700 bushels of potatoes per acre. So, they could, yeah, particularly if you don't have a market for it.
I want to know what your face lit up just a minute ago.
Yeah, I heard Mike talked about, used the term prairie, and Ed Loomis referred to that area that he had the sheep as a prairie. It's certainly not a prairie. What constitutes why they use that term?
Well, I think it was a grassland. I mean, if you look at my upside down map, you'll see it looks like they've got little grasses in there. And the same thing where Briscoe's property a little further south, he raised a ton of potatoes there. And he also wanted to ship it. But they kind of called it prairie because there was grass.
Okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to a forest.
Yeah.
Or as opposed to a swamp. I don't know.
Okay, so I think we have some hurry.
I brought a couple, we have 4 employees that we've had, one for 32, 23, 11, and 7 years. And Ardell does a book, I shouldn't say we. And this was this year, this is last year, you can just browse and move it on. But that's our Christmas present.
Well, there's while they're looking at that, there's a lot of information about how the whole idea of how you planted and everything, of course, was done by hand. Gene was talking about planting, what they take the vine and do each little single vine, punch it into the ground once they have it.
We got a rake, and it was like 6 inches apart on the sides, and the tines were like nails.
Yep.
And so my dad ran the rake one way and then ran it the other way. And then my job was to take a screwdriver with a groove in it
Yeah.
and punch a vine in each cross. And that's how we planted that.
What do they call those? I was asking,
What, the dibbles?
yeah, dibble, yeah.
No, it was a screwdriver.
Yeah.
No. Your dad was very mechanical, he should have made a dibble, if they have a little deal that,
You know my dad.
yeah.
You got dibbles with their screwdrivers too.
When I was a county commissioner, I remember visiting your farm during harvest one year. And I'll never forget this vintage of Mardell running that machine going up and down. It was a real family project.
You bet.
She ran a beater, we normally run beaters together. We had two with 10-foot reels. And I had a problem with the hydraulics, and so I was gone, out of it for the,
He was in reading the newspaper.
yeah.
Just saying.
And Ardell's, she's very anxious to do it, so, you know.
How many meters did my dad build for you guys?
Pardon?
He had one that he built it for.
He didn't have a beater, he had one that he borrowed from
No,
somebody.
he built it for
He
you
built the
guys.
one for Snyder's and he borrowed it back.
He built it, for,
Yeah.
I know the guy was real irritated every time we had to.
Oh, the guy from Chanel.
We didn't have a beater, we had a pruner,
Yeah,
and then he had to transform that into and this is walk behind.
yeah.
And I did that for several years, and the
No, you're
last,
right,
We
you're
went
right.
the last, I did a 4-acre bog walking behind this thing, and it's 6 foot wide.
Right.
And I ended up in the dark, and I had an employee, I put down a flag, one of those wires with a flag on it, as I'm going along, and he went to go ahead of me with a flashlight so he could see where I was going. And I pulled that up and put it on the other side, and I finished the last half acre in the dark. But that one, I said, this is the end of walking beaters. And
But you can imagine the hand picking, first the hand picking, then all kinds of scoops if you've been
We
to the
used to
Cranberry
vacuum.
Museum.
The
Vacuum picker, tried to suck it out,
And then in Pacific County, Brightwood, they do
In
it
Bright-
totally different.
Yep.
Different machines, different
the
mechanization.
dry harvest versus the wet harvest.
Yeah.
you know, and Crowley came here in 1922 for the summer. The growers were having problems, and he was in his junior year, between his junior and senior year at WSU. So the university sent him over for those 3 months or whatever, and actually stayed in our house that whoever would have been there then. But it would have been Funk's, yeah. But anyway, so then he went back to Pullman, and then he came with a full-time job in 23. And you know, when you think of trying to raise cranberries in the old days, when it comes March, late March, in our way of growing cranberries, you better be ready to irrigate, to put water on the vines, that in the freezing of the water, it releases heat and protects your vines, so that's essential. And we have our system set up so every 15 minutes it comes on for 15 minutes, and that is sufficient to get you by. And when you think of them talking about raising 200 barrels the acre without frost control, without insect control, you know, disease control, weed control, you know, all those things, even up till the time we came in the early 80s, people were using paint thinner for weed control. And it would be like, I don't know, 100 to 200 gallons an acre. it didn't seem to hurt the minds. And it would get the weeds, so. But anyway, I can tell you that what Crowley discovered and did really saved our industry, and that had repercussions in other growing areas too. And,
other crops.
and water harvest, that was in the 50s is when they started water harvest. And of course, we're water harvest here. Everybody, there's a guy who probably does 5 acres with a Furford picker like they use in Grayland. But in Grayland, that's all, mostly dry harvest with Furford pickers. And most growers, the average size farm used to be like 7 acres or 4 to 7 acres because that was hand picking, and they used the different kind of scoops and so on. But now it's typical that a grower would have like 28 acres because they'd have 4 or 7 acre farms, and they might be, like I know one of my good friends has 3 different locations for 28 acres of cranberries, and he had probably 5 or 6 Furford pickers, and it's almost like they have personalities as far as for different type of how the vines are setting and so on. But they envy us for the ease of harvest, but they make maybe 25% more than we do for fresh fruit.
Yeah, no, you have to dry harvest to get fresh fruit. Wet harvest, we dent the berries a little bit, and they are soaking in water, so they can't be used for fresh.
So
They
they're all
wouldn't-
juice
It's
and.
where juice, sauce, and craisins. Craisins is a big thing for most of our crop goes to craisins. Yeah. So things have changed. I mean, when Ocean Spray came in, it was a marketing time where growers would send their fruit down in these little boxes, little quarter-barrel boxes, to, like, say, San Francisco or wherever, and they didn't have a contract. I mean, people would say, oh, they were spoiled when they got here, so they didn't get paid. I mean, there was all that kind of problem, and so when Ocean, and in different areas as well as ours, and so when Ocean Spray organized as a cooperative, we did together to do our own marketing and all that. So big changes with that in the 20s, and then just all the changes have all been like Rube Goldberg things, you know. Somebody invents this. You can't buy, there's no John Deere for cranberry equipment. So you have to make your own, and we were just buying a feeder, an extra feeder from Wisconsin, and got an old one that somebody quit using because now they're using a harrow to go just slide it through. Frank Guyman, one of our growers here, Tucker Glenn, uses a harrow for his crop. Our bogs are too small because when our son Steve first tried a harrow, we got one when we bought one of their new machines, and he went a little too fast. He kept going, and all the berries went over the side. So we said they're too small. You can't make this.
Wisconsin growers come out here and see how we grow berries, and they just shake their head
They can't wait to get.
because their dikes are this high, and ours are like this.
They don't see how we can even flood high enough above the
Yeah,
bottom.
to get it. So that, that's a bit of a problem unless you have higher dikes for the harrow. And supposedly, our beaters do some damage to the vines. And most people have changed in Wisconsin, have gone to harrows, which is just running a machine with, it's like a harrow. That the machine has to go 3.5 miles an hour. And so they have like cruise control on the John Deere tractors, and they set them at that and go that speed and so on. But there's all kinds of different, there's no grower that has the same kind of equipment that his neighbor has. Yeah. But, and I would say, you know, that we're doing is, we don't owe anybody a nickel. We bought 3 farms since '06. And anyway, it's good right now. This was probably the best year we've ever had. Price-wise, we got $44 a barrel.
Wow.
And we had like 16,877 barrels.
Wow.
Jeez.
So that,
So let me ask you the hard question. The hard question is, how many younger growers are coming along? What, I mean, it seems to me that most of the growers are venerable, you know. They're of an age, and
I'm trying to entice my grandson out of Montana. And he works in concrete in the winter, and he was here up until he went home on a spring break because he was going to Clatsop Community College and working with my son in construction and building homes. And so he goes over to the airport, gets on his plane, goes to Helena, Montana, and then COVID hit within that week. And it was March of 2020, and his pickup sat in the airport there for about 3 weeks, and before he got a key back and somebody to go get it and whatnot. But anyway, seriously,
It's a worry because a lot of the growers here on the
yeah, I mean, I'm not just saying you guys.
In Bandon, or in Grayland, there's some younger ones taking over their farms and they're splitting them up some, but yeah, here it's a little bit different.
one of the things to be successful in cranberries, you have to renovate. You have to take out old bogs and put in new varieties. And we've done, like we bought the farm in '06 and '07. There were 2 farms side by side, Dave Ossie and the Shire farm. Lolita Morris actually was the owner. At any rate, so we've done 19 acres that we had. We've got 1.25 acres we're doing this year. We did 3 acres last year. But it also keeps my crew busy because we're putting ditch liner around for around the perimeter of the bog. We use 2 2x12s treated on the dike side and 1 over here with a ditch that's 12 inches wide. And we have put drains every 40 feet that go in to get the moisture or keep the bogs dry. And like today, as it turned out, the crew was going to plant. We got the vines all plotted out and everything yesterday. And when you got puddles on the surface, because it just takes a little while for, if it's continual rain, I said, let's wait till next week and not, because we've planted in the rain or when and you end up with tire tracks from the tractor. And then you have to go out there with buckets of sand because you got the thing, you know, and filling the tracks in. And
You need Gene with her screwdriver.
Yeah. I think they'd all mutiny, right? Because right now, all we do is we take the vines and we throw them in the air and do it all.
yeah, you just scatter the
And then
vines.
run over them, so.
But they ship the vines, they bale them, just like you're baling hay. And we have a baler that we used to bale some too for our own bogs that we'd do it. And we'd actually have a hose there, you're squirting the vines as they're going in the baler, which is something, you know, when you're thinking about baling hay, you don't want too much moisture, that'll cause a problem. So they shipped we got our shipment
ended up waiting until all the ice was off of their bogs in Wisconsin, which is April, May. And we'd be planting really late, we'd lose a whole year pretty much, so.
Yeah.
I
We
have
plan
a
to fall
question.
or end of-
Okay, so before you, like when Cranberry Farming first started, how did they keep so many vines back, like scions on an apple tree, and then you replanted? I mean,
Well, they
or were
probably,
they shipping them in from someplace else then?
well, they shipped them and then they shipped bugs with them and stuff like that.
But like way back? and
Way back. But,
Oh.
or they would have either mowed or they probably would have pruned there and then used the pruning to
That's what I'm saying,
replant.
yeah,
But researchers like Kim Patton
yeah.
said, no, you can't do that because all the fruit is on the uprights and what you're pruning off are the runners. So you're gonna degrade each year that you plant, it's gonna be less.
So there are places that just grow the vines to sell.
So the ones we get from Wisconsin, they mow them, so you're getting the uprights with them, so. But that is a problem in the industry as far as there's nobody checking on bugs, and so you have to trust where you're getting your vines and that stuff's.
So when you first started, 40 years ago, 50,
42.
yeah, 42 years ago, how much have you learned and how much have you changed your methods? Did you know a lot?
We didn't know anything.
I didn't know a thing about Cranberry.
He wanted to do dairy.
Just like everybody else that came
Yeah,
here.
he gave advice to dairymen on cereal grains and cereal crops and all that kind of stuff for 4
But having been an extension agent, I relied on Osmi Shalva, was the
Yeah.
extension agent there, and he did a good job. And anyway, so I had things that I had been told what you should do. And then I had a neighbor who said, you don't need to do that. And I said, well, I have about 15 things on my list, and until I learn that I don't need to do that, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah, just interviewing other growers right away, the best, you find the best growers and find out what they do. Some of them want to share and some don't, but anyway.
Has this tropical climate that we're in right now, is
Yeah.
that affecting your crop?
The hot summer, is really hard because we have to irrigate a lot and our ponds.
The
are
warm winter, I mean, we're getting still
Yeah, it's
50
not,
degree days.
we need cold nights and we need so many degree days of cold. And yeah, the climate change is affecting.
My son has been fighting leukemia for 4 years. So we harvest his farm too. And then we farm the farm on
Research farm.
yeah, the research farm. There's 11 acres there. So we end up harvesting 126 acres, and our crew gets kind of a bit antsy at the end. So we
Too
were,
much camaraderie.
yeah. But anyway, we'd like to get back to where we were, where we just, if we only did our 93 acres, well, we're in great shape. But having these others that we need to do is kind of puts us back a little bit. And we need to start, because I don't want to be the last guy hauling berries in, and certainly Ocean Spray doesn't want me to be there either. So we try and start as early as we can. This year, we just didn't have color, and we keep taking samples in. They have a Digi-Eye at the facility there on Sandridge, and Ardell, we take these samples, go in and find out where we were, and if you get below 20 on this for color, you're
Below 17.
yeah, they tell you to take your berries back home and do whatever with them. I mean, they won't accept them, so.
Because they need the certain colors for the craisins and.
But between 15 and 20 is, you get dodged some, that you don't want to take a chance of getting closer to 20. And so it was the 25th of
So
September.
what is the most important element for color?
Cold nights.
Cold nights,
Cold nights and
yeah.
warm days.
Yeah,
And we used to get nice in September. I remember really cold aren't getting that anymore.
Now, we have some varieties, Crimson Queen is a variety that colors up irrespective, well,
Perspective.
yeah, irrespective of the temperature and so on. So we start, is cherry picking, we'll get, we started off this year next to the lake outlet at Black Lake, that bog, 4-acre bog. And then the next bog is 1.5 acres. And anyway, we ended up with over 2,000 barrels, average 384 barrels the acre. And for the most part, we're kind of shooting for 200 barrels the acre. There's some, actually the guy who gets the highest yields here is Lane Sachs. And he averaged 300 barrels on his 22 acres this year.
He's got some really new varieties that he's paid a lot of money
Yeah.
for.
But at any rate, I was gonna get some Welkers, a variety that a grower raises in Bandon here a couple of years ago, and I got a call from him, and he's a good friend. He says, you know, I got scale in those, and they have scale in Bandon, which is a problem, and he said he didn't want to send it up here. But I would have had to pay $6.50 a pound, and you need at least 2,000 pounds to plant an acre. So it's, there's $13,000 per acre.
That takes 3 or 4 years to get a full crop, so when you're renovating, you need to get big crops on everything else that you're gonna use it. Tucker brought this box back to the marketing and stuff in 1940, in the 40s, the Crandon Farm. I don't know how many of you recognize this, that they did all their preserves and they canned and all kinds of things and did their own marketing. This is one of their boxes grown and packed on Cranberry Farm, Crandon Farm. So anyway,
Cranberry orange relish was the best.
a relish, yeah.
Or the marmalade, yeah.
So you have to be pretty big to be innovating on that. Do your own thing.
You did. Thank you. Thank you.
So that Frank Diamond now, it was one of the biggest farms, and it's now been, since the folks died, they split, and now they split the farm into two sections.
Two different, well, Guy Glenn ended up with 70 acres, and Frank had 127. But the 127, I think the whole thing needed to be renovated. It was just going downhill. And
So now they're struggling to keep it.
yeah, they have old varieties, and it's just kind of a sad deal that we produce more cranberries than anybody in the state. Then Tucker would be second, and Steve Gray would be third. And they bought, Tucker had Guy, Tucker's kind of taken over to where Guy didn't even drive a truck this year. Of course, with
So he's our youngest grower, actually, isn't he?
yeah.
Probably.
But it's a good point. We're all, well, what's the average age here? That's kind of like our cranberry growers. But yeah, my son is 60, and we have great hope for him to come back, and he's looking at starting to build a couple of houses now, so.
So he's feeling better. Good.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. But anyway, I would say that the extension and the university has been a godsend for this area, for bringing new information and making the industry survive through the years. And when you think about it, I think about the when Crowley was, you've got this area and you've got the Grayland area. Okay, Grayland's not too hard to get to now, but they didn't have a road to Grayland until 1954 or 56. He was here in 23. He had to go to Capalis and then over to Aberdeen and clear around to get to Grayland. That wouldn't have been real convenient.
Well, didn't he walk?
He walked a lot, too.
He walked on the peninsula, he walked,
Especially that summer, I'm sure.
Yeah. He did do it all. Yeah.
Yeah. No, he was very inventive and to set up the farm and to get it all set. The other story about cranberries here is that in '92, we were told that the university was in short supply of money, and they were going to sell our farm on Pioneer Road, sell that property, and move Kim Patton to Mount Vernon, the researcher. He'd do research out of there, which is a little over 5 hours to get down here. And, yeah. And anyway, we said, no, you're not. We ended up, the growers own the research farm. And that all happened in '92. And then the Templin Foundation that you heard about.
You guys probably did.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a godsend for us, because we've gotten money from them to build buildings and do things. And like our big meeting room, that was one of our first projects. And we got 50,000, and that put the walls up, and it was, you know, 2x6s showing on the inside, and then we worked on it and so on. But I think we've gotten, I don't know, 400,000 or 500,000
Great.
through the years.
That's great.
And that's from '92. And Melinda here is the one that's responsible for the museum and the
And the shop.
the gift shop.
The gift shop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great gift shop.
And fortunately, we have a person in there now who Melinda trained, and she runs the operation so that Melinda doesn't have to be over there so much.
We can't forget Cheney Foundation either.
Oh, yeah.
Were they the ones that helped us with
The venue,
Yeah, that's right.
helped us set up our home museum.
couple of grants from them?
Right, yeah.
And that museum, yeah, I'm always amazed at how many people, and the gift shop too, how many people are there year round. I mean, it's not,
I'm
it's really
amazed, too.
incredible when you think that it's, you know, it's not on the main road, it's not like Marsh's Museum.
Yeah.
You know, it really, it's a lot of people.
Well, I think we grossed 200,000 last year at that little.
Yeah, over
gift shop.
200,000.
Wow.
And if there's
Well, that was
anything that
gross income,
That's
that's
gross,
not
yeah.
profit.
gross,
We might have
yeah,
made 5,000.
which, yeah,
But still, that takes a lot of $5 items to sell, you know.
Right.
$5 to $10 items, it takes a lot of that to
The
have
whole
that
idea,
much
whole
money.
idea of the gift shop is to keep the employees there, to keep the place open.
And that was
For
our,
the
part
museum.
of our,
yeah.
part of our, what do I want to say?
501c3.
Yeah, our statement to keep a 501 mission stream.
We end up farming the 11 acres of cranberries, not because we want to, but we can't find any other volunteers.
But they do pay our people, so.
They pay our people, but we don't charge them for their trucks or the equipment. They have their own equipment for beater and pruner and so on. And one of our employees, Juan, who's worked for us for 23 years, he and
30s, WPA efforts to drain kind of the center spine of the peninsula. How much effect did that have on the cranberry industry? Did it make it into its modern iteration at that point?
I'm really not aware of
I
that.
don't remember that.
Did they ever do it, or was it just
Oh,
a
yeah.
proposal? They actually did it?
Oh, yeah, it's right down the middle, and you can still see the remnants of it. Yeah,
You're talking like.
it's,
And there's-
well, even Surfside has some of it. Goes through Carnegie Pat's land. Pat's golf course comes down here, goes behind, by Okies, that land from Bay north, there's drainage ditches back there.
Now, we,
Thirties, in the thirties.
we reconstituted the flood control thing here in 1986. And I was the chairman of that for 12 years. And Dobby and Dick Sheldon and Norm Greer, who else?
Those, they did the main drainages.
But a lot of the beaver damage or, blocking things up and so on. Matter of fact, I talked to my beaver man out here in the parking lot as I was driving in. But, and unfortunately, we have to control the beaver, or they just block everything up and you're stuck. But, they used to release them. I'm not sure what he does with them anymore, but we're sure happy to have them gone. I pay him $50 a beaver and $10 a mole, and he's pretty good at that too. Glenn McCullough, who had been a county employee for a lot of years. So, but anyway, South Main, which drains Long Beach, and I see that they're getting, the city had an ad in the paper, that they were getting, I don't know, 450,000 or something to do, because they've got these pump stations, like, there's one behind Chen's Restaurant, kind of within a block there, that pumps.
That's all South Main.
That's South Main.
There's East Main that runs down Pioneer,
Yeah,
north of Pioneer.
yeah. So they might have done some of those ditches, I don't know. But,
Are these
Anyway.
ditches still being used?
South Main is very important, and, as a matter of fact, we had a little farm that we sold last year, 2 years ago, that we used to rely on South Main for the water to pump into our pond. And now Brian and Hannah have that little farm, 6 acres of cranberries.
Opposite Snyder.
But they, opposite Snyder, but they pump from the back and off of the South Main. And Steve Gray, that's the source of his harvest water, is South Main. And it goes down, then it comes out on the ocean, the Willows area, they call it. Anyway, that's where we get our sand when we need to haul sand for building new bogs. I hire a contractor, Eric Workla, and he goes down there with an excavator to dig out the ditch because storms keep plugging it up, and the county has to get that sand out of there. And it's ideal if the county's just gone down there or hired somebody to get the sand and it's all in the bank, and then we can come down and get it off the bank. But last time it was, he had to dig it out, load it, and I think it's like $110 an hour for his trucks and his loader and all that stuff, so it mounts up.
So what, now, is that a federal law or state law? State law that you can get sand?
State law, that's
State
all
law.
the state land. Yeah.
State, but there's a federal law too. Oh, I guess it's,
This
It's an
isn't,
RCW that.
yeah, yeah.
this isn't off the beach. have gotten it off the beach, and you have to pay, the state parks.
Yeah,
You have to pay $100, and then it's like 25 cents a yard or something.
but it's only cranberry growers that can do that, right? Is that
Yeah,
right?
and I think Sid Snyder's the one that instituted that, or somebody
Yeah.
got it to be a state law, yeah, on
Because
state
you-
parks.
Because you use a lot of sand. You need
Yeah.
sand,
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Well, folks, so if you know anybody out there that needs to go into the cranberry business, I think, yeah, that needs a career. It sounds like there's one coming up in, 20 years?
Yeah.
You say you have 20 more years in the business.
He says he's gonna die on that.
Well, this is very interesting. Next month, February already? Oh my gosh. I think that we're going to be talking about logging, and Steve Rogers is going to talk about logging, and maybe Bob Rose, he wants to come and tell you a little bit about his operation, his dairy farm, and he also does some beef farm, yeah, not dairy, beef farm, and he also has a bit of a logging operation, so that fit in. So do you mind, Steve, sharing?
Just let me know how much time I have.
You know, all the time except what you give Bob Rose.
You know Bob, once he starts,
Oh, I don't know.
He's got a
good man, he'll do a
Well,
great job.
his is a 100-acre farm now. 100 years, good. Yeah, and I have he did a booklet, yeah.
Here's right, we have him at the museum.
It's wonderful, yeah, and,
He was gonna bring him to pass out today, and, and he got sick. Don't get sick. Be here-
I have,
Be here in February. It's great to have you here.
I have a Southwestern magazine from the 60s
right,
about the history of cranberry.
yeah,
I'll get you a copy.
Great.
It's
okay.
kind of neat, it goes way back.
Okay.
Way back.
Very weathered.
Larry Weathers did some.
Weathered.
Yeah,